Hey, folks, Roland Martin here with Roland Martin Unfiltered. Have a fantastic show for you today. We're here from the Let My People Vote event taking place in D.C., making phone calls to folks all across the country, but especially in Florida to encourage them to vote in that election, but especially when it comes to a constitutional amendment that will provide voting rights to those formerly incarcerated. It is a huge issue where they can actually change the state constitution, so we'll be talking about that on today's show. Also, I was in North Carolina yesterday. Students from North Carolina A&T, they were marching to the polls. Their souls to the polls, S-O-L-E-S, not just S-O-U-L-S. And also last night, Reverend William Barber held an event, a Get Out the Vote event at Union Baptist Church. Of course, Bishop Walter Mack. So we had a packed house there as well, encouraging folks, again, to get out the vote in North Carolina, a place that I called, and you hear that speech, Alabama, the 21st century. Also, Donald Trump praised the Republican nominee for governor in Florida as for going to Harvard and Yale, but he called the brother who went to FAMU a thief. We'll tell you how Andrew Gillum responded to that as well. Plus, we'll also deal with Eric Reed. He is not back down from his constant verbal battle with Malcolm Jenkins over the negotiations between the Players Coalition and the NFL as it related to the protest with Colin Kaepernick. All of that and more coming up next on Roland Martin Unfiltered. It's time to bring the funk. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin.
Folks, we're 8 days away from Election Day. Voters all across the country will be deciding a number of candidates who will be leading them in local, state, and national elections. Of course, most of the attention has been focused on U.S. Senate races, also on U.S. House races, and, of course, critical gubernatorial races in Maryland, Florida, and Georgia. And, of course, we also have been covering folks who are running for DA as well as other positions, but it was really important, a lot of the constitutional amendments. I was in North Carolina on yesterday for a Get Out the Vote effort, and Republicans there have 6 constitutional amendments, and they say could really change that state. Civil rights organizations, they want folks to vote no on all 6 of those because they want to essentially put voter suppression in the North Carolina state constitution. But a lot of the focus was happening in Florida, where there is an initiative on the ballot that will restore the voting rights to formerly incarcerated. Upwards of 1.6 million people could be affected. But here's the key. It has to pass by at least 60% in Florida to change the state constitution. Of course, Sheena Mead, we had her on about a few weeks ago, and the first polling data came out showing it is polling at around 72%, about 88% among Democrats, 59% among Republicans. And so it's looking real good, but as a poll, what really counts, what actually happens. Well, of course, we're here in D.C., where folks are making phone calls to the Sunshine State, encouraging folks to vote. So joining us right now is Melanie Campbell, National Coalition of Black Civic Participation, and also Cleola Brown, A. Philip Randolph Institute. She's the president. So how y'all doing?
Doing great, Roland.
So the initiative in Florida, I think, is totally different what we've seen before, because typically what happens is we've seen lawsuits, but in this case you have African Americans who are leading an effort to change the state constitution, and this could really upend and change that state if it passes, to have 1.6 billion people having the right to vote. If you're a Republican running in that state, if you all of a sudden want to run on law and order, you might have a problem.
Oh yeah, I just left Florida. You know, I'm a native Floridian from Mims, Florida, so I was able to go home and get on the Let My People Vote bus tour, Get Out the Vote bus tour all throughout Brevard County, and to tell you, the folks are fired up. But you mentioned it when you first started, that 60% threshold. we need folks to know. That's why we're here making these phone calls. I'm so glad Cleola partnered with us, because you've got to, it's not 50 plus 1. People say, oh, this has got to get a majority. No, 60%. And I don't believe polls. I don't, and so everybody down there is really fired up and pushing. So we need everybody, even though everybody, it's not too late to join a phone bank. You can do it virtually. We're doing it here in Washington, D.C. We have 30 folks over there at AFL-CIO at Cleola's office. We're really pushing to make sure that everybody knows that everybody can make a difference. And the thing is, if this passes in Florida, it's like folks was out there, it's bigger than Florida. It really changes. It changes the dynamic. We know 4 states, as you shared with folks before, are impacted by these kind of really tough, unnecessary laws that were really put on the books to make sure black folks weren't able to utilize our political power. So we need everybody just to push this thing through across the finish line.
Cleola, how many folks y'all trying to call?
We are calling everybody that answers the daggone phone. We've got predictive dialing that's going on right now, and our folks are on the ground as well. We're going not just to the big cities, but we're in Okeechobee, Lake City. We are all over the state of Florida hanging signs. Even the bail bondsmen are letting us hang the signs up on their buildings, because you meet 2 people and one of them knows somebody who's been incarcerated. Talk to the other one and they have somebody else that they might acknowledge that they know that needs the right restored. So it's an issue that hits the community hard. We know what the history has been. Our folks have been going to jail for stuff they didn't do for a very long time, and they are sick of it. And this time with this initiative, they are anxious and willing to work to make sure that they get a chance to vote.
And Roland, this is it's 13 amendments on the ballot in Florida, right? And we tell folks to vote yes on 4 and no more, because a lot of them are really bundled up together. If you ever heard such a thing, if you vote, you got a couple of those ballot initiatives that if you got 3 things in it, and you have to, and you might like one, but there's 3 things in it. Right? This particular ballot was put on the ballot by the people. The rest of them are done through other kinds of means, but the people put this on the ballot because they got the petitions and did all of and went through all of the court cases. And so this is a people's amendment. The people of Florida wanted it on there, and so, but we got, like I say, 60%. We got to push. We got to push to across the finish line.
And when you say the people, Desmond Meade
Yes.
and Sheena Meade, they've been
Yes.
very involved in this. Of course, Desmond served time in prison, and for him, not only do they not have the right to vote in Florida, in his case, he got out, got his law degree, but you can't actually even get a license to be able to work.
And look, this has been going on for over 10 years. It took 10 years to get this.
To even get it on the ballot.
When he walked in my office, Solange Benton with our Florida Coalition on Black Civic Participation introduced us, and so this thing has been going on for 10 years. It didn't just pop up, and so the ability for this to change lives is real. We were in the barbershop in Titusville, Florida, where I was from, and the brothers having conversations in the barbershop, really saying, and many people inside of that barbershop cannot vote, and they understand how important it is, and that was the kind of conversation. So the kind of barbershop talk you're hearing, we were out in the park talking to folks who were, in their 80s, and being able to understand how important it is. And Roland, this is, and you know how hard it is to get folks to vote sometimes. In the days that I was on the ground there, I did not run into one person who said, I don't know why I need to vote.
That's right.
I didn't run into one person who said this wasn't a good idea. And that's not normal, in the normal course of things. So this is something really different happening here. And so we were really excited. And in a couple of days, we're going right back down to Florida and help. And if you can't physically come, like I said, you can go to Second Chance, you go to Florida Rights Restoration Coalition and actually sign up to do it from your home. And just a lot of people did that when President Obama ran. People were making phone calls. That's what this is. This is the kind of movement this is.
Cleola, one of the things that when I talked to Desmond and Sheena last time we chatted is that, again, people have to understand white folks in Florida who don't have the right to vote. And so they've been able to see sort of that cross, and also being able to reach different communities to get them to understand that or how critical this measure is.
Well, you're right on point, because it's not just our community. Even though our community has been impacted the most, when our folks have been hitting the ground and talking to folks, it's everybody who will even stop and say, what did you say about restoring the rights? In the grocery store, at the beauty shop, in the communities of all colors where this particular piece of legislation keeps so many people from the polls. And they're tricky in Florida. Now, I know that's your state, Melanie. I'm from South Carolina, so it's just as bad sometimes. But on this issue, it has crossed the color line because so many folks have served time that did not commit the crime. But more than that, they're wanting to get in to make the change. And I think this time it's going to work.
They also have been very much involved in getting social justice folks involved. I know John Legend has been down there.
Yes.
And
I connected Boozy with him as well, other artists as well, because several of them have served time and can't
Absolutely.
vote.
Absolutely.
And Roland, this has been a real coalition, and you've been really helpful, throughout all of this. And I was down in Florida, in Orlando. Michael Baisden was out there pushing the issue. The AME Church has been big. This
Fraternal
phone bank that we're
organizations,
doing
too.
together is a coalition effort. APRI and Coalition, Urban League, the sororities. It's a mix of folks that have joined together and folks that just continue to push this thing. So we got 8 days.
All right, and again, for folks who don't know, so this is one of the signs here. They have, of course, vote yes for 4 second chance, hashtag yes on 4. And if you go to secondchancesfl.org to get more information as well. And again, they're not taking anything for granted.
That's right.
Because again, requires 60% of the folks voting for it in order to change the state constitution. Last question for both of you. We have the initiative, of course, is also on the ballot in Michigan when it comes to gerrymandering. I do believe that if this measure is successful and it passes, then it is going to cause progressives to wake the hell up and to realize what conservatives have always done, use ballot measures to change things. And so imagine then, I keep making the point to all these folks out, these progressive billionaires. Look, you got Alicia Reese sitting there in Ohio who's been trying to get that Bill of Rights passed to put the right to vote in the Constitution. Also, other states that also could be looking at restoring folks who are formerly incarcerated. It may not take them 10 years. They may be able to get enough signatures to have it on the ballot in 2020. If that's the case, you might see this spread like wildfire across the country, because once it's enshrined in the state constitution, legislature can't take it out.
That's right. And you have done such a good job of making the issues clear after people have spoken about it. So for what you've done, my brother, thank you. Because people are watching and they're repeating what you say as far as explanations across the country, not just in Florida, but across the country. What you're doing is important. What your show does is important. So I wanted to thank you personally.
I appreciate it. And so again, folks, in Florida, number 4, vote yes on 4. I will be watching what happens. And here's a piece. They're making phone calls, obviously. But look, a lot of y'all have folks who are from Florida, live in Florida. You got relatives in Florida. And so you can call them, you can text them. Do the exact same thing as well.
Yeah. And we say yes on 4 and no more.
That's right. That's right.
Melanie Cleon, we really appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you,
Don't keep making
Roland.
the phone calls. Folks, right now we want to tell you about what happened yesterday in North Carolina, where Reverend William Barber and others with Poor People's Campaign had the moral revival trying to get out the vote there as well. Plus, students in North Carolina A&T were marching to the polls. And so we put this piece together so you can get a sense of exactly what takes place. But here's also what's interesting about North Carolina A&T. The campus is literally split into 2 districts. You can stand on one side of the street and you're in one district, and the other side of the street, you're in another district. That's how Republicans in Florida have been disenfranchising African Americans, because they don't want those large block of voters. And also the students there also did not have an early voting location on campus. In North Carolina, Republicans have refused to put those early voting locations on college campuses because they are fearful that to have that many students voting for Democrats. And it's not just North Carolina A&T. We also have seen this at Duke, North Carolina as well, where they have removed those early voting locations. And so one of the things that happened was that, so first of all, I was going in town for the event at Union Baptist Church of Bishop Walter Mack. And so when I landed, Reverend William Barber, he was actually at the Souls to the Polls. And normally we hear Souls to the Polls, that's normally churches, that's SOULS. Well, the students there decided they want to do SOLES. And so because the early voting location is literally 2 miles away. They rallied in a shopping center and walked the 2 miles to actually go vote. So our cameras were there shooting as well. So in a moment, we're going to actually show you some of that. And also, of course, the rally last night. Earlier, I talked about the constitutional amendments in North Carolina. There are 6 constitutional amendments, and what has been happening there is Republicans for the last decade, and I've been saying this, that North Carolina is the Alabama of the 21st century. What they have been doing for the past 10 years is doing all they can to suppress as many votes as possible. They have been stripping power from Democrats. In the last election, the Republican governor was thrown out. The Democrat won there, Democrat Cooper. They then began to strip powers from him. So what they have done is they want to actually change 6 parts of the state constitution to literally enshrine voter suppression in the North Carolina state constitution. And so that's one of the reasons they're rallying as many people as possible to vote against those amendments. What often happens in elections, we vote at the top. So we'll see who's running for United States Senate, who's running for governor, who's running for U.S. House. And the further you go down on that particular ballot, you see fewer and fewer votes. What has to happen for everybody who's listening and who's watching, you have to pay attention from top to bottom. Because if you only vote on the top of the ticket and you ignore the folks who are running for judges, who are running for DA, or who are running for clerk positions, who are running, again, those constitutional amendments, those things can pass with very few votes. And so we must understand how important that is. I got an email today. There are 19 black women. There are 19 black women who are running for judicial positions in Houston as well. And so I think we're ready to go to the. So again, so this is the video you're seeing right now, folks, is the march with students who were, of course, North Carolina A&T. And so you're watching that right now. And so. All right, folks. So that was, of course, in the daytime. But then, of course, we went to the church last night at Union Baptist Church in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where, of course, a Get Out the Vote rally was held. It was a packed church service. Folks were all there, and about 20 or 30 elected officials were also there. Now, they would not allow them to actually speak, but they did, of course, have them in attendance as well. And so here's some of that event last night. In 17 days, I will turn 50, which means that by virtue of Reginald and Imelda Martin not getting together until February 14th, 1968, all right, folks, having some difficulties when it comes to that video. We're going to fix those in just 1 second, but let's do this here. Guys, come on. Let's bring my panel out. So come on out. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, Eugene Craig, and also Michael Brown. And so go ahead and get all of you seated. And so I think we have our video issue fixed. Let's go ahead and show you what took place last night at Union Baptist Church. In 17 days, I will turn 50, which means that by virtue of Reginald and Imelda Martin not getting together until February 14th. Okay, don't know what's going on, folks, with our tape machine, but let's get that fixed. But right now, let's go. I want to go to our panel first. So again, Michael Brown, of course, formerly with the DNC Finance Committee, Avis Jones-DeWeaver, leadership strategist, Eugene Craig Organization. Again, you have folks back here who are obviously making phone calls and to get folks out to vote. And it's very interesting when I hear some people who are saying, Look. I had one guy who was on Twitter. He said, if the candidates are not speaking about issues, I'm not voting. I said, dude, you're doing this as more than one person on the ballot. I'm like, you can't act like there's only one person running. I said, you can't convince me that there's nobody running where you live that will keep you from voting.
It's crazy. I dealt with that with a couple of my buddies. I'm like, look, there's a full ballot, up and down a ballot. I mean, everything from local up to federal office. Maryland, we have a very important governor's race. There's no reason not to vote. Even if the candidates don't necessarily, quote unquote, represent your values or the issues that matter to you, you can always write somebody in and get a movement started.
Absolutely. I mean, I always take those excuses with a grain of salt. I don't actually, to tell you the truth, I don't accept them as truth. I feel like maybe that person is too lazy to even look to see what are people's positions. Because clearly, if you have something that is important to you, you need to figure out where people stand on those issues. And even beyond that, you need to understand that if you are not part of the process, you are still going to be subject to whatever happens as a result of that election. So just by the mere point of trying to have some say in designing your own destiny, you need to vote.
140 million people in the last election did not vote, Michael. 140 million. Reverend Barber, and again, hopefully when we had this video, he said last night in his speech, he said, understand that Trump won with 77,000 votes. Yeah. He said 77,000 votes in 3 states. He said that's who elected Donald Trump.
And that 140 million or so is basically a third of our population. I mean, that's just a shame. I mean, you go to other developed countries in the world, and they don't have those kind of percentages. Their percentages are obviously much, much, much higher. And, Avis, I have to co-sign with what you said. When people say that kind of stuff to me, and Eugene, you had the same experience, it makes me kind of angry. I'm like, why are you finding an excuse not to vote? Yeah. I mean, I'm saying, look, if you're having a problem finding a babysitter, I think I said this a couple of weeks ago, find one. If you need me to watch your kid while you go, I'll watch. Right. If you need a ride, I'll take you. And you should always take other people with you to the polls. Don't go by yourself. There's going to be something, and you're so right, the consequences of elections. Doesn't matter whether you don't vote or not, they're still going to impact you. Yeah. And then you're going to sit at home, Monday morning quarterback, complain, my vote wouldn't have mattered anyway. It absolutely would have. Roland talks about the 77,000 that elected Trump. He didn't even win the popular vote. Yeah. He won the Electoral College by 77,000 votes. If people had gone to the polls, who knows what would happen.
First of all, we saw it here in Virginia where it was a tied race, and it was decided by a coin flip. Yeah. And the Republican won over the Democrat by a coin flip, and that's how Republicans were able to keep the majority in one of the chambers. Yep. A coin flip.
Which could have been totally avoided if you turned out a couple more voters. I mean, you go back to 2016.
Literally
one more. Every vote literally counts.
Absolutely.
I mean, you go back to 2016. I mean, you turn out 20,000 more voters in Detroit and Flint. And you turn out another 100 or so thousand more in Miami and Orlando. I mean, we're looking at we don't have to deal with travel bans. We don't have to deal with a constant assault on our rights and our way of life daily by this administration.
Absolutely. I don't see how anyone, quite frankly, right now can live through what we've just seen in this society, not just over the past 2 years, hell, over the past week.
72 hours.
Over the past week. And have the nerve to sit up there and say, I'm not going to vote, if for no other reason than to send the message that what you are witnessing now is not acceptable. It is disgusting. And to just at least register your disgust with the current status quo, you need to get out and vote.
I do want to talk about these constitutional amendments because obviously they're making phone calls as it relates to the amendment in Florida. But again, Michael, when I look at North Carolina, the time that we spent there, I mean, again, what Republicans have done there is sickening and despicable. And Republicans are saying nothing. Black Republicans as a group saying nothing. And what they have been doing is so shameful, stripping power, stripping the ability to appoint folks by the governor because he's Democrat. They were so shameful that in the last election when the Supreme Court flipped 4-3 in favor of Democrats, they literally floated an idea to strip most of the power from the Supreme Court, that's supposed to be the highest court, to the court below the Supreme Court because they held a majority there. That, to me, is absolutely crazy.
And you can do that when you have more seats in the state legislature.
And a veto-proof.
And a veto-proof majority. And, again, when Eugene talks about there's more than just one race on the particular ballot, you have to pay attention to all that. And again, folks
actually,
also
let me add one more thing. They were so diabolical that they changed the judicial elections this year to partisan. Solely, no, only for this year. Only for this year, and plan on saying after this year, it goes back to normal. I mean, that's sort of the games they have been playing in North Carolina. I mean, this is, to me, is out of the Ross Barnett book in Mississippi, the George Wallace book in Alabama. This is absolutely Jim Crow politics. And when the federal court blasted them for their voter ID law, they cited Jim Crow era, what's happened in North Carolina.
And again, same with, these majorities in these state legislative bodies. And as much as a wonderful job in history making that President Obama did, he did not put the infrastructure in the Democratic Party nationally to compete on these local elections. And because of that, Republicans took advantage of it. They said, if Obama's not going to do it, if he doesn't care, we will. And now that's what's we're seeing the results of that.
And that is one of the legacies of President Obama. And people got all upset.
All upset. Yes.
I don't give a damn if y'all getting upset, and I really don't care.
You can't talk about Miss Jenkins.
Well, I don't. I don't care. One of the legacies of Obama that was a failure is that he cared more about OFA, Obama for America, as opposed to the Democratic National Committee. They completely gutted the infrastructure. They lost 1,000+ seats all across the country. And what has been happening lately is the efforts to rebuild that. You look at Florida, the supermajority of Republicans have it in Florida, in North Carolina. And Texas has not had a Democrat elected statewide since 1994. That is a state that used to be all Democrat.
Yeah.
Used to be every statewide office was held by Democrats before John Tower became a United States Senator in the 1980s. That shows you, again, what happens when you don't pay attention to those down ballot, small, others call unimportant races, Eugene.
But I want to go back to your constitutional amendments and ballot initiatives. The thing is this: what our side have learned is that the way you boost bad candidates, the way you boost turnout is through ballot initiatives. Carl Rove in 04 and 06 was, he was the driver behind, a lot of the cultural wedge ballot initiatives. But the other side of that is this: in most states, you do have contribution limits. Virginia doesn't have them, but Maryland, we have them. A lot of other states have them. The way around that a lot of times is to run a ballot initiative because, hey, one person can write a $10 million check.
Yep.
And what you're doing now is, you now have somebody hitting every single door. You now have dollars flowing into pretty much all these races because while I'm out here, talking to you about XYZ issue, once I know you're locked in, I just pass that information back to the state party and they can come and hit you for whatever candidate that, needs backing.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So I think we have the video ready. I think. Let's pray that we have the video ready from last night at Union Baptist Church, Reverend William Barber. In 17 days, I will turn 50, which means that by virtue of Reginald and Imelda Martin not getting together until February 14th, 1968, I did not have the ability to be in Albany, Georgia, when they had the Albany movement in 1961. I got here 7 years later. But if I was, I would be there. If this was Birmingham in 1963, I would be there. If this was Selma in 65, I would be there. So being here is not solely because Reverend Barber asked me to be here. Being here is also vitally important because being here means that I am literally in Alabama of the 21st century. Anyone who understands history, when you look at interposition, when you look at nullification, when you look at all of those efforts that were put in the way to keep black folks from being fully free Americans, North Carolina has operated in the exact same vein as Alabama and Mississippi, and you might as well say Republicans in this state are walking in the same vein as Ross Barnett in Mississippi and George Wallace in Alabama. Now, I know there's some people who are watching across the country who are here who are saying, well, no, I think you're trying to make too much out of this. But when you have individuals who literally ask the question, when do black folks vote? And they say 70% of voting in the first week of early voting, and they begin to stop that. When you begin to remove early voting locations from college campuses, not just black, but also white. When you have individuals who seek to deny opportunities, even in the face of federal judges saying this has discriminatory intent, you still have folks who are conditioned to still try to make it happen. You're operating in the same nation where Texas is watching North Carolina, and 5 federal judges ruled that it was discriminatory, the voter ID bill they had in my home state of Texas, and yet the Obama administration sided with the plaintiffs, yet the Trump administration sided with Texas when it went to the Supreme Court. When you begin to look at folks who are so mad and angry that they lose in this state, the Supreme Court 4-3, then they want to give more power to the court below the Supreme Court as opposed to the Supreme Court, that shows you to the extent folks are going to go to steal power. So then you begin to understand, and in what world can you walk onto a college campus and on one side of the street they're represented by one elected official, and then on the other side of the street by another elected official that is clear designed to split the power of the black vote? Waller County in Texas doing the exact same thing. The Prairie View A&M trying to keep those HBCU students from voting. And all of these things are happening, and I am literally watching as many of us are slow walking through life somehow saying, well, it's really not that bad. But tell me it's not that bad when you can't fund education for your children. Tell me it's not that bad when it comes to resources and hospitals and health care. When it comes to all of those things, I dare say this generation has gotten us only stop going to MLK events and celebrating him as some civil rights bobblehead, and understand that he did his job and it's now time for this generation that still has breath in their body, still has power in their legs, to stand up and say, as long as there is injustice, as long as there are folks who are trying to attack us and deny us, we will not stand silent and allow it to happen, not in this city, not in this state, and not in this country. You have a right to stand up to be a full, free American. You have the right to demand justice, and I dare say to anybody who is unwilling to fight, you better listen to my frat brother Burton Woodson Tandy, who said we will fight until hell freezes over, and then we will fight on the ice.
Since 2013, with the Shelby decision, 23 states have adopted some form of voter suppression. Since 2010, 26 states. That represents 54% of all African American voters in those states. Over 50% of the United States Senate, nearly over 50% of the United States House of Representatives. Since 2010, way before Trump. That's why we can't just vote about him. Way before Trump was on the ballot. The legislature, the House of Representatives, and other places, and state legislatures were passing these voter suppression laws. And then after Shelby, they went, wow.
Yes, sir.
President Derrick Johnson is here fresh from a victory just a few days ago in Tennessee. I mean, they have gone voter suppression to the extreme.
Yes, sir.
Right? In Georgia, the Secretary of State who's running for governor has blocked 53,000 from registering to vote. And you hear that number and you say, oh my, well guess what? Since 2012, he has canceled 1.4 million. Before we ever heard about Trump, he canceled 1.4 million voter registrations. And he canceled 670,000 in 2017 alone. Gerrymandering, districts, state voter suppression. There are 16 states, 16 or 17 seats in the United States House of Representatives, according to the Brennan Center, that if it wasn't for gerrymandered districts that stack and black districts. And by the way, black legislators have to let groups like the NAACP work out the gerrymandering, and don't ever want to get in it to protect you. Because we don't need these seats where you got 70% black voters so you don't ever have to run again. And then you got all these other black voters that we could use to be a coalition between black and white people to elect candidates of our choice. Because in the legislature did that. They said, we're going to help you. We're going to do what in North Carolina. And they packed all these black voters in the black district. But the goal was to bleach and drain progressive votes out of other places so that they could not be a coalition. But there are about 16 seats that Brennan said if it wasn't for gerrymandering, they wouldn't even be in the category they're in terms of political party. And Donald Trump won by 77,000 votes. 77,000 votes. I said that in a place one time and 3 preachers cussed. I had to pray for them. Huh? $77,000 votes. He won by 30,000 votes in Wisconsin. Well, he didn't win. Let me tell you. He was selected by the Electoral College because he lost by 3 million votes in the popular. And that's only happened 3 times, other times in history. George Bush and Rutherford B. Hayes in 1877. But 77,000 votes. Now, in Wisconsin, he so-called won by 30,000 votes. But Ari Berman says there were 250,000 black votes suppressed in Wisconsin. And white too. He won by 10,000 votes in Michigan, but there were 100,000 black people in Detroit that were registered, didn't even vote. Oh, wait a minute, we're coming to North Carolina. Don't come to North Carolina because it's worse than Michigan. Trump won by less than 170,000 votes in North Carolina, and 500,000 black folks stayed home that were already registered. And 2.6 million voters in North Carolina who were eligible to vote. 2.1 million of them registered, didn't vote. Now, that does not mean we then say, well, don't worry about the voter suppression, just vote. Voter suppression is wrong, and voter apathy is wrong too. So, we have this narcissist, God bless his heart, because of 77,000 votes. This man got a microphone to say all the vile stuff he said because of 77,000 votes. He's got the ability to sign a tax bill to cut $2.3 trillion from people and from programs that's going to put Medicaid and Social Security in jeopardy because of 77,000 vote. He has the ability to sign a piece of legislation that took our military spending to over 60%. We spend 60 cents of every discretionary dollar on war and only 15% of discretionary dollar on education and health care. The average CEO of military contractors earn $19.2 million a year when an average combat soldier on the front line earns less than $30,000 a year, all because of 77,000 votes. Huh? His Secretary of Education is cutting billions of dollars from education because of 77,000 votes. He's brought a group of clergy in and around him, you know, like Jeffers and Falwell, and they are teaching him that the only moral things you ought to be concerned about, Mr. President, as long as you're against abortion, against gay people, for prayer in the school, and for tax cuts and for guns, that's what God is really caring about. Right. When the fact that the Bible is clear what God is caring about. Luke 4, the poor, the brokenhearted, the blind, those made to feel unacceptable. Matthew 25, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was a stranger, when I was an undocumented immigrant, did you welcome me? When I was sick, did you care for me? But because of 77,000 votes and 2 million people just in North Carolina, and over 107 million Americans that could have voted but stayed home. Stayed home. And because they are critical times. And if we ever needed to vote, we sure do need to vote now. I don't know if Republicans are going to go to the poll. I don't know if Democrats are going to go to the poll, but I know the sons and daughters of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, we better go to the poll.
All right, folks. Again, that was last night. And tonight, in about 30 minutes, there'll be another rally taking place in Greensboro, North Carolina. And so if you check out the Poor People's Campaign, they'll live stream or go to the Facebook page. You can actually see that as well. Folks, Florida was in the news today. Of course, the orange one decided to tweet about the race. And so he decided to talk about Ron DeSantis trying to help his campaign. And so he sent this tweet out. It's kind of weird. He tweeted, in Florida, there's a choice between a Harvard, Yale-educated man named Ron DeSantis, FL, that's his Twitter handle, who has been a great congressman and will be a great governor, and a Dem who is a thief and who is mayor of poorly run Tallahassee, said to be one of the most corrupt cities in the country. I want to go to our panel here. So I guess we can praise DeSantis for going to Harvard and Yale, but I guess we call the HBCU graduate a thief.
Man, that's a trash tweet from a trash president. That is a trash tweet from a trash leader. I mean, if we even call him a leader. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, FAMU, our HBCUs on many levels compete with Ivy League schools and better than Ivy League schools, provide a better experience than a lot of the Ivy League schools. But to try to make that comparison, I mean, that's not a dog whistle. That's a dog holler.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, if anybody has watched the previous debates, I would say, if anything, I almost feel sorry for Harvard and Yale, because that has certainly depressed their value in terms of what you would think that they would produce in terms of a graduate. So, it is obviously, as you mentioned, a dog whistle from a campaign that started from the very beginning with alludes to racism in terms of monkeying it up and his known consortium with white supremacists. So he's just continuing down the gutter as we can expect from him.
Michael Andrew Gillum responded on Twitter, there's a choice between having the courage to at the person you are trash talking or not. Real Donald Trump is howling because he's weak. Florida, go vote today.
Well, I'm glad to hear him take the high road as usual. I mean, he's a classy person and a classy candidate. I'm a proud dad of FAMU students. My twin sons went to FAM, so I have a lot of respect for FAM students as well as for the soon-to-be governor. But this is what we're seeing behind us too, Roland, with Melanie Campbell and the Black Civic Participation is what we used to do. We used to sit around in our living rooms. At least I used to watch my grandmother have phone banking folks. People would get a phone, and they sit in the corner of the living room. She would serve tea and sandwiches, and people would just call their neighbors and say, I hope you're going to get out to vote. And that's what this is all about, not just for the Florida elections, but elections all over this country, up and down the ballot. So I'm glad to see that Melanie is keeping up the good work, and I'm glad you decided to host the show here in our offices.
That's going to be a lot of campaigning. The White House has announced Donald Trump is going to hit. He have 11 rallies in the next 8 days. Also, President Barack Obama.
Wait a minute, don't you have a country to run?
Yeah, no kidding. And so, again, 11 rallies in 8 states.
You don't mean
President Obama also is hitting the road as well. He was in Georgia campaigning for Stacey Abrams, and so we're seeing that as well. And interesting today, former President Jimmy Carter came out and said that Brian Kemp, who, of course, who was Secretary of State, who's running for governor on the Republican side, should step down as Secretary of State. Previously, they have done so. And so, perfect example, again, where Carter trying to lead now. Like you're saying it right now, it would have been great to say this a month or 2 months ago. But again, to have the person who is Secretary of State still governing the elections when they're running for governor, that's trash.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you. I mean, you cannot self-deal yourself. You can't self-deal yourself. The thing is this. Even let's say Kemp wins, right? The next 4 years of him as governor is going to have a huge shadow over it. Because essentially, you self-dealt yourself a stole the election. That's going to be the narrative. Mm-hmm. And with that narrative, you get nothing done as a governor.
But he doesn't care. Here's the reality. The Republican Party is about sheer power by any means necessary. And so we have seen from all of the underhanded tricks and overt voter suppression that he's been involved with, he doesn't care. He just wants to win. And I would say right now, if Stacey Abrams does not win on election night, I would have her contest that 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 victory, the loss, because I do not trust him to oversee a fair election. He's clearly looking to build in an advantage for himself, and he's not going to do anything. Absolutely.
It's probably going to go to a runoff.
Because you have 3 candidates.
There's 3 candidates in there, and if nobody gets 50% plus 1, then we were dealing with a whole nother, I guess, roughly month. I mean, so we have a runoff there, we have a runoff in Mississippi at the same time. Mike Espy.
You guys to respond to this today. Of course, Attorney General Jeff Sessions was at an event Judicial Watch was sponsoring, and as he was about to speak, you had a couple of individuals who were seated there who decided to let their feelings be known to Jeff Sessions, and this took place.
I was hungry, and you did not feed me. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. I was naked, and you did not clothe me. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me.
I thank you for your comments, and
prison, and you did not visit me. Brother Jeff, as a fellow United Methodist, I call upon you to repent, to care for those in need, to remember that when you do not care for others, you are wounding the body of Christ.
well, thank you for those remarks and attack, but I will just tell you we do our best every day to fulfill my responsibility to enforce the laws of the United States.
How do you know? Actually sharing with you the words of Jesus himself, the words of Jesus that are actually represented in the book of Isaiah.
All right, we thank you for sharing your thoughts.
I thought we were here to protect religious liberty. I am a pastor of a Baptist church, and you are escorting me out for exercising my religious freedom. That doesn't make any sense. That seems very hypocritical for this group of people to be wanting to protect religious freedom while you are escorting me out for doing that very work.
So you can't complain that they were bum rushing you at dinner. This was a Judicial Watch breakfast. Clearly they were attendees, and they wanted Jeff Sessions to know how they felt in terms of pastors taking a moral stand against this administration.
Listen, there are no more rules to this. There are no more rules to this. I mean, we have a trash attorney general, that has no problem locking up kids, separating them from their parents, traumatizing them, that, want to go back to an era of, probably Bull Connor, if he could. But to say that and this is, Jeff Sessions that is run as the family values, Christian conservative, compassionate conservative guy before he was attorney general. To have pastors that took the moment they had with you to express their displeasure and have them escorted out and arrested, that goes beyond reproach. Mm-hmm. But one more time, there's no more rules to this game.
When we talk about no more rules, Newsweek is reporting that Jared Kushner and Ivanka had to persuade Trump to condemn anti-Semitism in the shooting over the weekend at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, 11 who were killed. And you have a president who chose to keep campaigning. On one hand, he says we need to be uniting and healing, but then, of course, he follows that up with crazy tweets. This man does not have the capacity to even remotely bring healing to a country, to bring words that will somehow bring folks together. I mean, his whole MO is divide, divide, divide. The attacks about enemies of the people with the press. Maybe we can go down the line. This is exactly where he is, and Republican leadership will say nothing.
Absolutely. It's not just where he is, it is who he is. This man is clearly a narcissistic psychopath. It is impossible for him to have empathy for someone else. You should not have to be told, okay? When 11 people have been murdered in their house of worship, you should not have to be told to express empathy. You should not be someone who can only express empathy when you're reading it off a teleprompter. This is someone who does not care for anyone or anything beyond himself. And you're right, he has no capacity to bring the nation together because he has no desire to bring the nation together.
And the only thing that's going to matter is when we wake up next Wednesday after Tuesday's midterms, The only thing that will matter for the Republicans that are left with their seats in the House, you will see them saying, oh, now we have to be civil. Let's now turn the page. We had a tough election cycle. And then that's what the hypocrisy is going to be all about, because they're now knowing that 2020 is coming, and the way to keep their seat is not to get on the coattails of this guy, because they're going to see that he doesn't have any coattails, and that's what's going to change the dialogue.
You can't talk about unifying the country and not, call your two predecessors, your two of your last three immediate predecessors that had pipe bombs sent to their house that just happened to be intercepted by the Secret Service.
You can't pick the phone up.
You can't pick a call. You say, oh, we're going to pass on that. I mean, that's crazy. That's
He
bananas.
doesn't care.
I mean,
That's the point.
He doesn't care.
you can have disagreements with folk.
And speaking of not caring, of course, obviously the tragedy that took place over the weekend in Pittsburgh has stunned so many people. Again, 11 folks in the synagogue gunned down by a white domestic terrorist. But another white domestic terrorist last week was close to doing the exact same thing at a black church in Kentucky. But it wasn't for that church door being locked and him not being able to get in. That was how the tragedy was averted. I wanted to give you a little more information about the two black folks who he did kill in a Kroger. He couldn't get to the church. He chose to then go in and shoot this black couple in the Kroger. First off, one of the victims, Maurice Stallard, 69 years old. He was shopping with his 12-year-old grandson for poster boards when he was shot by this white domestic terrorist multiple times. Stallard was a military veteran and retired General Electric employee. He also is the father to Kelly Watson, Chief Equity Officer to Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher. The second victim was Vicki Lee Jones, 67 years old. Jones attended Western Kentucky University for a couple of years, where she met her future husband, George Jones, who died of cancer in 2010. She also retired from the VA hospital, where she worked as an office administrator. And so, of course, funeral arrangements are pending for both of them. Again, two victims of white domestic terrorists. And to our panel here real quick, this is the thing for me. Morning Joe all of a sudden decided to focus on white supremacy today. I'm like, appreciate that. It took y'all a long damn time. But the bottom line is, we've been saying this for the longest, what is happening. And you have folks in this country who are in this administration, they want to focus just on Islam. But the reality is, we've seen a significant surge in white domestic terrorists, but they want to call it something else. We are going to call it exactly what it is. Michael.
And you know, it's interesting, and I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but the titles of, oh, they're crazy, they're wackos, there's something wrong with them, always goes to folks that don't look like, that their skin is not brown. It always is something must be wrong with them. But if it's a brown-skinned person committing these kind of acts, they're doing it for a particular political reason. It's the exact same thing. When you're calling it domestic terrorism, Roland, that's exactly what it is, and we should call it that.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. We have always in this country, the majority of terrorist activities have been put in place by right-wing domestic white supremacist terrorists. This is not something that is new. It's always been this way. And we've seen an increase of it. You're right. So while there is this big sort of overreaction, you're exactly right, and different characterization of acts that are committed by people who are brown or black or of a different religion, when it comes to white male terrorism, that, quite frankly, is homegrown, good old-fashioned American terrorism that we've known for centuries.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're looking at every massive shooting, from school shootings to adults, letting off bullets. I mean, then very rarely is it a person of color or a person of the Muslim faith. It's typically your average white boy that decided to let off some bullets, let off some steam.
All right, folks, going to go to a break right now. When we come back, we'll talk about life and legacy of a hugely important playwright when it comes to feminism, especially black feminism. That's Ntozake Shange. We'll talk about her next right here in Roland Barber Unfiltered.
We've been to hell and back again, and death cannot have the final word. Actor Ozzie Davis.
All right, folks, our HBCU Given Day School is Hampton University. Should have made the house since I was at their homecoming over the weekend. you go to my Instagram page, you'll see some of the videos. But no, Hampton University, of course, is our school of the day. And so we want you, of course, to support them as we support all of our HBCUs by going to hampton.edu. They are ranked number 3 in the ranking of among all HBCUs. And, of course, founded in 1868, located in Hampton, Virginia. And so, again, hampton.edu. So please support Hampton. And, again, if you're a graduate, cut a check. Not only when it comes to your reunion, but you should be cutting a check every single year. Anthony and Henry, who work on my show, 2 Hampton graduates. 2 of you damn sure better be sending checks back to Hampton on an annual basis and not every 5 years. Are we clear? Yes, we are. All right, then. See, that's just like when it comes to voting. You got to hold your people accountable when it comes to supporting their schools. Folks, sad news over the weekend when playwright, poet, and author Ntozake Shange died Saturday. She was 70 years old, of course, most acclaimed for the 1975 play for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. Of course, that was made out into a movie by Tyler Perry. He paid tribute to her this weekend as well with a photo of her and all the women who were in that particular movie as well. Of course, that play, more than 750 performances. And so over the weekend, a number of black women were tweeting about her impact as well in terms of the kind of coverage. And, of course, that film, you might remember, starred Tandy Newton, Kerry Washington, Anika Noni Rose, Janet Jackson as well. But beyond that, she published 19 poetry collections, 6 novels, 5 children's books, and 3 collections of essays, and taught at several universities, including Yale, Howard, New York University, among others. And joining us right now to talk about her and her legacy is the co-founder of the Hurston Wright Foundation, Marita Golden, and also still joined by Avis Jones DeWeaver, Michael Brown as well. How you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Glad to see you. And so when we most folks, again, know her for that one play. But what should folks know that they maybe not know about her?
Well, we were very honored to honor Ntozake just 1 week ago at the Hurston Wright Foundation's annual gala. We presented her with the North Star Award in recognition for her canon of literature as well as her incredible literary activism. And she is mostly known for Colored Girls, and it really literally rocked the world, the socio-cultural world of the mid-1970s. The Cora poem play drama appeared at a time when people like Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Gloria Naylor were writing about the lives of black women. Well, that play came along and spoke about the lives of black women with even more thunderous honesty. And so she gained a reputation for boldness, for a kind of literary braveness that really paved the way for a lot of us, including myself. I was just beginning to write, and I think when I saw that play, I began to figure out what I wanted to write. She was an amazing woman.
You say on her last week, how did she appear?
Well, Ntozake had 2 strokes, and what's most amazing is that she was in a wheelchair, that is, she couldn't walk. After the stroke, she had to learn to read, write, talk all over again, and she wrote her poetry using voice recognition on the computer. She was totally active. She was a living, working artist. She'd been to Puerto Rico after the hurricane down there. She was traveling all over. She had a new book, ironically called Wild Beauty, which is what I really think she was, a wild beauty. And so even as she had these health challenges, she was traveling. She was reading she read at Busboys and Poets on Tuesday and died on Friday. So she was an incredible model of the power of art to allow you to overcome challenges. She suffered with bipolar around that, and she had some dark periods, but her art was something that she hoped would always help her move mountains.
Avis, again, there were a number of sisters who were tweeting over the weekend just talking about her place when you talk about black feminism.
Absolutely. It's so important. I love the word that you use, boldness, honesty. You know, it was groundbreaking to see yourself in her work and to see people that you know in her work, because so often Black women's experiences are not centered in our society. In many respects, it's invisible. So to have someone not only pull back the covers, but to show all the corners and maybe some of the dark spots and some of the brightest spots in the most bold and just beautiful ways, it's touching. And to do that at a time in which it was, quite frankly, part of the groundbreakers was especially important.
What would you say to a young woman who's a millennial or who is a what is it, Gen Z? What is it, Gen? I don't know what all the letters are now. I don't know if it's Y, Z, A, A, B, B, C, C. What would you say to a generation of women who were not here in the 70s when that play hit, when that production hit, when that book hit, who may not understand her importance?
Well, I would just say read her work because it is perennially relevant. It didn't perish in importance and significance. And her plays, her poems, now that we've lost her, they comfort us, and her legacy endures. So she's as fresh today as she was in the 70s.
And one more thing for you. When someone passes, there's so many different people remember them in so many different ways. So for you, your favorite piece of work from her?
Well, I loved her poetry. In fact, I don't know that I can say that there was. What I loved about Ntozake was that she loved her people. And if you read her, she always got accused of, she hated black men. But if you really look at her poetry.
Did she get accused of hating black men, or did she hate black men?
No, she got accused of that. She married two and had a child with one. So she didn't hate black men. But in her poetry, you see her love of black people, her love of justice. She spoke Spanish. She was bilingual. In fact, her new poetry book is in Spanish and English, so that she was loved globally. And she's just I can't say there's any one poem. I love the life she lived.
All right, then. We'll leave it right there. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot for your remembrance. Folks, so we're here again. Let my people vote. They're making phone calls all across the state of Florida trying to get folks to focus on the ballot initiative number 4, which will restore the voting rights to formerly incarcerated. And so we certainly appreciate them for allowing us to broadcast our show from here. Don't forget, hold up, where's the sign? Don't forget, here's the website. So you always got to have a sign. Of course, secondchancesfl.org. So be sure to go there and check it out as well. And don't forget, you can support Roland Barber Unfiltered by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Tomorrow we'll have more on the election. We'll be 1 week away, so we'll be talking to some of the candidates tomorrow right here on the show. And also we'll catch up with a black woman who was targeted by the pipe bomber. Of course, beyond President Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and others, he was also targeting journalists. And the FBI is also saying that potentially he had a list of 100 people he was targeting. And so we'll have those updates for you tomorrow as well. I want to thank Michael. I want to thank Eugene, Avis. I want to thank everybody else as well. Thank you so very much. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Don't forget, we have the restream of our show every 2 hours beginning at 10 p.m. And so if you miss it, also go to our YouTube, Facebook, and Periscope pages as well. All right, folks, y'all take care. Got to go. Holla.